Chinese government can come after them at any time, raid their offices at any time, take their IP and give it to state-owned competitors at any time. And so the writing's on the wall there. Whether they announce sooner or later that they're actually moving their headquarters, they're shifting people out as quickly as they can.
The law is so vague, so we don't know where the red lines are. So the situation now is that because we don't know the red lines, so we're very afraid to do something that might cross the red line or might step on the red line.
China doesn't really care about Hong Kong's prosperity. They care about the security of the Communist Party, and they see Hong Kong as a threat to that.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Now, December 10th is United Nations World Human Rights Day. This year, it also happens to be the day when people in Hong Kong will vote for their district councillors. We know that Hong Kong's never been a democracy, but in the past, this was the one way which people could have their say on who represents them. One person, one vote for the councillor who would eventually be the part of the apparatus which chooses the leader, the chief executive. These elections happen every 4 years, and for the first time, there are no democratic representatives, and it's being branded as patriots-only elections. We look at what that means for the city and how Beijing's tightening grip has affected almost every aspect of life in Hong Kong. And for this, we're joined by Shirley Leung, Editor-in-Chief of Photon Media, speaking to us from Taipei. Thank you very much. And Samuel Bickett, a Hong Kong human rights lawyer and advocate who operates the Hong Kong Law and Policy newsletter based in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Samuel, for joining us too. It's great to have you both on the program, but I'm going to start with Samuel. Give us a sense or an idea of your human rights work with Hong Kong, seeing that you are based in Washington.
I see my role as, really around focusing on what we can do here in Washington. So I was based in Hong Kong for about a decade. I spent a little bit of time in prison there after the protests. And since then, I've focused full time on Hong Kong human rights work. A lot of what we do here in D.C. is, of course, related to the U.S. government. There's various things like around sanctions, around sort of U.S. businesses and investment, things like that we can deal with. There's a big effort going on to try to change some of the diplomatic relationships and some of the diplomatic outposts here in the United States. So that's a lot of the work that we do here, advocacy, community organizing, things like that.
Great. Shirley, tell me a little bit about Photon Media and why you're based in Taipei.
Yes, Photon Media we started this year, April, so it's around 7 months now. So we chose Taipei as base because it's near to Hong Kong and with same time zone, because we focus on Hong Kong news, and I think it would be every reporter would say it's important to be in the same time zone, because we have to follow the news in Hong Kong closely. If we're in Europe or in other places, it would be quite difficult for us to follow it closely. So that's why we're in Taipei, and of course because it's Chinese speaking as well. Our audience are Chinese speaking Hong Kong people or in Hong Kong and around the world. So I think that's why we chose Taipei.
Samuel, the Hong Kong democracy activists, and particularly during the Hong Kong protests, there was a lot of support from the United States and Washington, with a lot of people in the U.S. government or in the Congress voicing their support for activists, and many of them very young activists. And now there's a sense that they have been let down by them, with many of them languishing in prison in Hong Kong. Can you tell us if there is any impetus right now or any kind of motivation for the U.S. to be more involved in helping those young activists?
Well, I think first, I think people have kind of rose-colored glasses about what happened during the protests as well. I mean, the administration back then was really resistant to really doing much. At the time, the administration was trying to negotiate a trade deal with China, and they were reluctant. It was really the U.S. Congress that pushed and insisted that, passing the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, the Hong Kong Autonomy Act, which tried to provide some support, some sanctions, and various things like that in response to the protests, and then in response to the national security law. And I think the same thing is happening now. We have a new administration in the United States, but they also have been very reluctant to do anything supporting Hong Kong, supporting Uyghurs, supporting Taiwan, because they're trying to improve the relationship with the PRC, same as the last administration. It's really Congress that pushes these things. Introducing Act, Congress is now marking up a bill called the HKETO Certification Act, which would deal with these quasi-embassies that the Hong Kong government has across the world, including in the United States. There's a newly introduced congressional act that would sanction 49 judges and prosecutors. So, there is movement. I don't think it's necessarily a Democrat or Republican thing in the United States. I think it's really the different roles that Congress play versus the administrations that have been a lot more unwilling to step up. But I will say that Hong Kong's political prisoners are incredibly brave people, and people who have been through a lot. A lot of them knew that they were going to be in a difficult position. They knew that they were getting into a risk, and we should be helping them and doing everything we can to support them. And that's one of the things that we push for and advocate for here.
And Shirley, as someone who spent a lot of time on the ground in Hong Kong and someone who is constantly watching and listening to voices from Hong Kong, how much confidence is there that the international community or the United States could actually help Hong Kongers, particularly those that are now imprisoned or those that are still trying to fight for human rights?
I think of course, it is not an easy work to do and to do it continuously because, of course, people in Hong Kong nowadays, they're under very stressful situation, under this national security law, and people Hong Kong people migrated to other places around the world. They might have started their own living or their own lives, new lives. So it's not easy to continue to ask people, Hong Kong people, to be aware of what's happening in Hong Kong too, or to do actively or do advocacy of that. But I guess because the situation is getting worse and worse, and then with political prisoners still ongoing trials and they're still in prison.
One does wonder what difference all of that really makes. I mean, we've seen sanctions slapped on Hong Kong. We've seen on Hong Kong government officials. In fact, the chief executive has also certain sanctions on him already. But I want to move it to the national security law, which you mentioned there, Shirley. And Samuel, as a lawyer, can you give us a very brief, clear overview on what that is for an international audience who may not be familiar with it?
Yeah, so the Hong Kong national security law was passed in June 2020, and it essentially creates a parallel court system for what they call national security cases. Now, for those in the West, what the Chinese government defines as national security is way broader than what we would, right? I mean, it's it extends to pretty much all government criticism. There's some wild definitions out there where they include environment and basically anything they want. But really, the national security law focuses on criticism, sort of working with foreign governments or what they call foreign forces, and subversion, what they call what they see as trying to overthrow the government. But to give an example of how this law is used, right now there are 47 democracy politicians on trial in Hong Kong. It's been a very long trial. Most of them have been sitting in jail for the entire time. A lot of them very old, very senior. And their supposed subversion under the national security law was simply running in an election that sought to actually win. And so that's what we're dealing with. They go through a separate process with specially appointed judges where they have very little hope of actually getting due process. And the national security law is probably the most famous, but not the only measure that the Chinese and the Hong Kong governments have taken to crack down on dissent in the city. And it's been a pretty brutal one.
Right, and on that note, Samuel, that poster behind you could get you in big trouble in Hong Kong, as it was one of the protest slogans. And under the national security law, you could be seen as violating that law. You mentioned the 47 that is going to be taking place. Among those on those trials, and you mentioned those were people who were going to prepare for elections, and that was, some of them were the district council elections. So I want to take you back to the district council elections, these ones that are being branded as patriots only. So what does that mean? Well, here's an explanation from John Burns, Emeritus and Honorary Professor at the University of Hong Kong.
So what this basically means is that the authorities have clear control over who may stand for election, who is nominated, and they use the word patriot, which is not a new word. It's been around since Deng Xiaoping was talking about Hong Kong and one country, two systems, but it's been interpreted recently by the central authorities, and there are various levels of patriotism. I mean, at the most basic level, you safeguard national security and the interests of China. At an advanced level, you do all of that, but you also are safeguarding the constitutional system on the mainland, including the role for the Chinese Communist Party.
So, Shirley, now given that these district council elections seem to be tightly controlled as to who can run and who can represent the district, is there now any outlet for Hong Kongers to choose their representatives or to choose the people that lead them?
As I know, there's no outlet or no ways to choose anyone or any leaders that Hong Kong people would like to choose. So I think district council and legislative council has been like these two institutes are the ways people can choose. Like it's impossible for us to choose our chief executive, right? So only a small group of people can choose. So without district council, I think there's no way to choose any leaders that Hong Kong people would like to choose. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about institutions then that could theoretically protect people. And one of them should be the judiciary. Samuel, where's Hong Kong at with its judiciary?
The judiciary is, they insist strongly that they're still independent and that, rule of law is alive and well. I think on the other far end, you have people who are saying that the judiciary has no independence whatsoever. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I spend a lot of my time on my newsletter and elsewhere kind of watching and analyzing the judiciary for signs of that they've been co-opted. Now, on the national security system, they're completely co-opted. You have anybody who gets funneled into this national security system, their case is designated as a national security case. Those judges are specifically appointed by, Beijing's man in Hong Kong, John Lee. The system is pretty much rigged from beginning to end. So the judiciary is not in good shape. With that said, we do still see occasional good decisions. We see occasional acquittals outside of the national security process. We even occasionally see the Court of Final Appeal step in and give a good ruling. With that said, the last time we saw the Court of Final Appeal stick to the law and reject Beijing's interpretation, where they said that Jimmy Lai could choose his own lawyer because the law says that he can choose his own lawyer. Beijing stepped in and they used a provision of the national security law to, quote unquote, interpret the national security law to overrule the Court of Final Appeal in Hong Kong. So at the end of the day, with that threat there, these judges know that they either get in line or they are done, and they're really powerless to stop Beijing doing whatever they want to do.
Okay, so you mentioned Jimmy Lai, who was the tycoon, businessman, founder or of Apple Daily, who is now behind bars. Let's bring it to the situation for media. Once Hong Kong was an international media hub, thriving. Almost every international outlet had some kind of representation in Hong Kong. What is the scene there now, Shirley?
I think the media outlets and the press freedom now in Hong Kong is not in a very good stage. I must say. I think some of you may have known that a few journalists, overseas journalists, U.S. journalists, Japanese journalists, they're rejected to get into Hong Kong in the past few months without any reason, without giving any reason why they can't come into Hong Kong. And there are some broadcasting channels were forced to shut down, and then with the index from the Hong Kong Journalist Association and the reporters, the RSF, the ranking of Hong Kong's press freedom going down. The whole industry is shrinking because the national security law, the law is so vague. So we don't know where the red lines are. So the situation now is that because we don't know the red lines, so we're very afraid to do something that might cross the red line or might step on the red line.
Well, Hong Kong used to be known for its rule of law and an independent judiciary. Since the introduction of the national security law, along with erosion of other institutions, there has been an exodus of companies and international staff. The government blames the pandemic. Singapore reaped some of the benefits with logistics majors like DHL and FedEx, among the giants either shifting their regional headquarters from Hong Kong or expanding their operations in Singapore. Now, this chart from the Singapore Straits Times shows the number of global firms regionally headquartered in Hong Kong dropped from nearly 2,000 to below 1,400 for the first time in more than 10 years. At the same time, the number of people employed by those conglomerates fell to around 140,000 from the earlier high of 200,000. Now, Peter Lewis is the director of Peter Lewis Consulting Limited in Hong Kong, and he's the host of Money Talk. That's a business and finance podcast. He gave us an overview.
There has been a decline, and we've had this brain drain from Hong Kong of people leaving the city and going elsewhere. I think about 300,000 people to date. That's about 4% of the population, a bit more than 4% of the population. I think about half of them have gone to the UK under a special sort of visa scheme there. And clearly they won't be coming back anytime soon. So we have got a problem that we have to try and attract talented people to come to Hong Kong. And the government has put in place various initiatives to do that, to get graduates, to get wealthy individuals to come and live in Hong Kong, and also to get companies to come and domicile their headquarters here in Hong Kong.
Now, Samuel, how closely linked do you think this kind of economic downturn and exodus is linked to the national security law and human rights situation, perhaps not just in Hong Kong, but in many parts of the world?
It's directly linked. Look, I think it's one thing that I've noticed, and it frustrates me, is, a lot of people will say, well, no. The big thing was COVID and the way that the Hong Kong government mismanaged COVID and cracked down so harsh and made life unbearable for people. Well, they were only able to do that because of the national security law, because of the lack of autonomy. And I think what's happening, I spent many years as a corporate lawyer in Hong Kong. I think the Straits Times chart is actually, and I'd seen that before, is really telling, because what it shows is that there hasn't been that big of a drop in companies, announcing, oh, we're moving our headquarters. There's been some, but where you see the big drop there is in companies and how many people they're employing in Hong Kong. There's a reason they were in Hong Kong in the first place, because it gave them access to the Chinese market. without having to deal with the Chinese arbitrary enforcement of laws, political bullying, and political harassment. And now that benefit doesn't exist in Hong Kong anymore. The Chinese government can come after them at any time, raid their offices at any time, take their IP and give it to state-owned competitors at any time. And so the writing's on the wall there. Whether they announce sooner or later that they're actually moving their headquarters, they're shifting people out as quickly as they can.
Right. And Shirley, back to the media situation there. We're seeing a lot of international media companies relocating. You yourself have somewhat relocated. Can you tell us about the vibrant scene that Hong Kong used to have and what it looks like now for media?
It used to be like really vibrant, of course, like with like the spectrum is so large, and then with lots of like foreign correspondents in Hong Kong. But now I guess people around me or reporters like I know like from all over the world, they are like reconsidering like having their correspondents now in Hong Kong, or actually their correspondents are not able to get the visa, the working visa, like when they renew, they can't get it, so they have to leave. So I think the situation now, it's quite like you've never seen it before. I guess it's very new to the media landscape as well. I worked for Apple Daily, and then I worked as an independent journalist after they closed down, forced to shut down. So do my reports and my features on my own. But that would be really difficult, and you have to face national security, or you have to face the white terror as well. You're not comfortable with that. So I guess like that's why some like reporters and editors in Hong Kong used to be in Hong Kong. They choose to like leave Hong Kong and like establish their own or new news outlet outside Hong Kong to report on the news that you can't really report now in Hong Kong.
Right, and while the government is not doing much to try and help the media landscape, it's quite evident that the Hong Kong administration is trying hard to keep its economic goodwill. So earlier this month, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, that's the territory's de facto central bank, hosted a conference with many of the biggest names in global finance. And here's Peter Lewis's take on that.
They did this last year for the first time as a way of trying to, if you like, promote the fact that Hong Kong was back as a financial centre. So they wanted to get all these banking heads into Hong Kong and make a big thing about it. Business as usual. Hong Kong is back. We're here. We're ready to do business. It didn't quite work out like that, because if you look at what's happened in the last year or so to the financial sector, it really has struggled. If you look at the number of initial public offerings, for example, in the first 9 months of this year, there were just 47 of them. And that they raised about 24.5 billion Hong Kong dollars. Well, that's down 2/3 from a year ago. Investment banks, their fees from deals involving Chinese companies in currencies other than the yuan. So the idea is they come to Hong Kong because they want to raise funds in Hong Kong dollars, which is pegged to the US dollar. The total fees this year is just $540 million. Well, in 2020, it was $3.75 billion. So again, the investment banking fees are considerably lower. If you look at the performance of the market, the Hang Seng Index is down 10% this year.
Well, Samuel, while the government's not admitting it, I mean, there must be a sense that a lot of these harsh rules and laws and and vague rules and laws are dissuading international companies. How likely do you think it is that the government is going to take that into effect and roll back some of this, extremely stringent and rigid laws that put in place?
Well, no, the opposite's happening. So they're gonna crack down more. So what the Hong Kong government is doing now is they're trying to paper it over. They're sending people across the world. Their friendliest face, they think, is Paul Chan, the financial secretary, who's actually in San Francisco right now because John Lee got banned from entering the United States. But he's been going all over the world. John Lee was in Saudi Arabia. But underlying this is that these as was said, the underlying numbers show that these campaigns aren't really working. Maybe they're gaining a few private offices. Maybe they're gaining a little bit of investment, but it's so marginal that it's just not going to work for them. They know that, but they're between a rock and a hard place. China wants them to crack down more. China doesn't really care about Hong Kong's prosperity. They care about the security of the Communist Party, and they see Hong Kong as a threat to that. With that in mind, I think in late 2020, after the national security law, the Hong Kong government indicated that in 2021, 2022, they would pass what's called Article 23 legislation, which the national security law is a national law. It's a Beijing law. But Article 23 of the Hong Kong Basic Law actually requires Hong Kong to pass its own national security legislation, which it hasn't done to this point, even since 1997, due to a lot of resistance to it. They announced that they were going to do that, but then they delayed it. And the reason for that was because the economy was doing so bad. They didn't want to pass another national security law that was going to do a lot of horrible stuff and make the world outraged again. So they delayed that. They've been delaying national security trials, trying to bring in more investment and paper over these things. But none of that's worked. Article 23 legislation, by the way, is something it's going to be quite harsh. So, for example, it's going to include trade secrets, national secrets type information. It's going to allow them to crack down on the internet, to further censor what people say in the public sphere, and make it a lot more like the mainland when it comes to free speech and sort of access to information.
Thank you very much. On that, we have run out of time, and I'll wrap it up here. A huge thank you, Shirley Leung, Editor-in-Chief of Photon Media, speaking to us from Taipei, and Samuel Bickett, Hong Kong human rights lawyer and advocate who operates the Hong Kong Law and Policy newsletter, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Thank you both so much for your time and thoughts. And of course, a huge thank you to our viewers. It has been good to have your company. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.